Hello, people. I'm Matthew Nyman, a filmmaker and student of history. I come to you here today, late November, open window, rain in the backyard, to talk about the legend of Prester John. So in the course of this video, we're going to be digging through the historical importance of this character, what he meant to the people, anywhere between the 12th century and the 15th century is when all of these discoveries and letters and fictitious things happen around this phantom character of Prester John. So we're going to be digging through that and trying to understand the mindset that the people would have had that were looking at this thing, this myth, looking towards it, trying to discover it, and hoping for it. For somewhere around 500 years, the European mind had their heads wrapped around the idea of this Christian king off in the Indias. We'll later find out that that could have been interpreted to be anywhere. Who knows? In the 13th century, Marco Polo mentions of hearing of a Prester John in the Far East, and Christopher Columbus, for all of his quirks and features, the two books he brought with him on his first voyage to the New World both extensively mention a Prester John. So certainly there was a fascination in Europe of finding this Christian king that would, for instance, help with a crusade. So already, just maybe 2 minutes into this video, we've mentioned a time span between the 1200s and the late 1400s, where this character was seen as a feasible myth. So where does this idea start? Where does the idea of a Prester John start? And for this, I think it'll be time for a good story time. Go with me, if you will, perhaps back to Rome in 1144, with a meeting between the Pope and at least two of his bishops. Who are these people, you may ask? Well, one of them is a man we call Otto, Bishop Otto of Freising. The other one is a man called Hugh, Bishop Hugh of Jabala. The other person, he's a man called Eugenius. He's the Pope. This is the account of what went down according to Bishop Hugh, according to Bishop Otto. Bishop Otto, the one who's wrote this. He related that not many years before, a certain John, both king and priest, who dwells beyond Persia and Armenia in the utmost east, and who, with all his people in a Christian but a Nestorian made war on the brother kings of Persia, putting the Persians to flight with dreadful carnage. Prester John, for so they are accustomed to calling him, finally emerged victorious. Hugh said that, after this victory, the aforesaid John moved his army to the aid of the church in Jerusalem, but that, when he had finally reached the Tigris, was unable to transport his army across the river. He was forced to return home. It is said that he is a lineal descendant of the Magi, of whom mentioned is named in the Gospel, and that the ruling of the same people that they governed, he enjoys the great glory and wealth that he uses, no scepter save one emerald. Inflamed by the example of his fathers who came to adore Christ in his manger, he had planned to go to Jerusalem, but by reason before said, he was prevented, so men say. So apparently, he's a pretty dope king in the east that tried to save Jerusalem but got stopped by a river after defeating massive armies. Seems pretty... So there's a lot we could break down in that letter, but frankly, I'm not quite that smart, and as John Goodman would say, I've kind of been going through some things recently. But what we can talk about, I feel it's essential, is some hermeneutics. No, that's not right. Eschatology. Nope, the study of death. Entomology. Nope, that's the study of bugs. Etymology. Etymology. I quite enjoy it, and it's important to talk about, especially when we're talking about Prester John, because it's not really a title. It's kind of like Jesus Christ. You know, Christ isn't his last name. Prester isn't really his first name. Now, if you're going to research Prester John, First of all, it's pretty difficult to find historical ground around the belief in a myth. It's been a bit challenging because you'll just get a bunch of dates and weird letters and stuff like this. But I'm trying to ground it as hard as I can. But you will find that Prester is kind of the title that we've given to a lot of potentially separate stories, myths, but they all kind of emulate, I suppose, this same idea of this king. So you'll hear Prester John and Prester John and a whole multitude of other P-word John for this character. But the two core ones I've found are Prester John and Prester John, and there's actually an interesting background to those words that kind of help establish the myth and why it was perhaps so interesting to the European mind. And even in Otto's first account of Prester John, there are different translations. So this one I found, it says his name was Prester John, but another one I found, it says he was called Prester John, according to the other people. But basically, in Latin, Presper means priest. So it's the idea of this Christian king. He's a priest, and then John. You can't get much more Christian than that. So another thing that would be very enticing to the European mindset. And in Greek, Presper translates to elder. And very interestingly, the Apostle John refers to himself as Presbyteros John, or Elder John, the apostle of Christ, essentially. So I hope you can start to see and formulate a little bit of why this would have been such an enticing story to the European mind in this time. A long-lost Christian king, perhaps a disciple of St. Thomas in India, someone who might, for instance, help take back a certain plot of land in the Middle East. Yeah, you can kind of start to see why people wanted to believe this. So going back to the story and Otto's account of Prester John, the first one ever published, you can see how the tentacles of Prester John can start to spread. And soon enough, by golly, in a couple of years, Emperor Manuel of the Byzantine Empire receives a letter. From who, you say? Well, by golly, once again, it's from Prester John himself. What does that say? I think it's time for another story time, don't you? So in this next story time, imagine with me, if you will, that you're in Istanbul, Turkey, formerly Constantinople. I can imagine pretty easily because I actually used to live there. So I'll show you some video of how potentially this meeting might have gone down in the beautiful Church of Hagia Sophia. John, priest by the almighty power of God and the strength of our Lord Jesus Christ, King of kings and the Lord of lords, to his friends, Manuel, Prince of Constantinople. What an interesting thing for an Indian king to say. Anyways, blah, 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 greeting, wishing him, blah, blah, blah. And then here we go, very interestingly. If indeed thou desirest to know wherein consists of our great power, then believe without hesitation that I, Prester John, who reigns supreme, surpass in all virtue, riches, and power all creatures under heaven, blah, 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 blah. We have determined to visit the sepulchre of our Lord with a very large army in accordance with the glory of his majesty, to humble and chastise the enemies of the Lord Christ of the cross and exalt him, his blessed name. Honey flows in our land and milk everywhere abounds. In one region there no poison exists, and no noisy frog croaks, nor scorpions are there, and no serpents creeping in the grass, no venomous reptiles can exist there, or use their deadly power. In one of the heathen provinces flows blah, 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 blah. He later basically goes on to say that his kingdom borders, some say the Garden of Eden, others say the Fountain of Youth borders his kingdom on the eastern side. All incredibly interesting things for a Indian king to be saying randomly to the Prince of Constantinople. Crazy stuff, man. Crazy stuff. This letter was soon translated into nearly every single European language at the time. So it was very widely published, and because of that, the rumor spread even further. This Prester John character in the letter apparently was the ruler of all three Indias, near, middle, and far. What does that mean? That's a very good question. As mentioned at the start of the video, Marco Polo did actually mention and quote of a Prester John in his travels. And around the same time, another story author adventurer was circulating called John Mandeville, which we now know to be another Phantom John like Prester John himself. But at the time, the escapades of John Mandeville were much more widely accepted than that of Marco Polo. And while we now know Marco Polo might have embellished some of his stories to be a bit more dramatic, he was at least a real person, whereas John Mandeville would not have been. And Marco Polo cited a Prester John as a Nestorian king that got in a feud with Genghis Khan, essentially over a girl, essentially. In Marco Polo's tale of Prester John, he and Genghis Khan actually end up in a war over a girl. Allegedly, Genghis Khan thought Prester John's daughter was quite fair and wanted to take her, essentially. And Prester John in this story was a little disgusted at that. You want to take my daughter? I don't think so, man. And so Genghis Khan in this story, being Genghis Khan, wiped the whole place out. And there was actually at the time a Nestorian Christian king in Central Asia, but after these ideas circulated and the Mongols did what the Mongols did best, the idea of this Prester John being in Central Asia or India kind of started to fade. Once again, that idea of near, middle, far India. So from there, rather than giving up the idea that this character existed, naturally, they started looking elsewhere. And if you look hard enough, you can pretty much find anything. So with that, it's getting very late, and it's time to move on to Africa, specifically Ethiopia. And to talk about Africa at this time, and specifically European relation to Africa at this time, we have to talk about, of course, Prince Henry, who they later called the Navigator. And he sponsored all sorts of voyages into and around the Atlantic and obviously around Africa, around that area. And he did so for a multitude of different reasons: to know what was beyond the Canary Islands, to develop trade agreements with far-off partners, to learn of the extent of the Muslim influence in Africa, and obviously spread the Christian faith. And, the whole story that it was his destiny. But he also specifically put in there, search for Prester John. He told his sailors, search for Prester John. Vasco da Gama himself apparently carried a letter from the King of Portugal to the man himself, Prester John, and is known to have asked continually around to see if anyone knew of this Christian king that he was being so heavily enticed to find. Now, of course, you and I have the wisdom of knowing that there is no Prester John, but if you put yourself back in this time and you've grown up hearing these legends, these stories of this mythical kingdom, and you're, say, an explorer going through Africa, and you end up in this place called Ethiopia in Africa, and all of a sudden you find this king who is very wealthy in Africa, and he happens to be a follower of Jesus Christ himself, I think you would have to be forgiven for thinking that you finally found this phantom king in this place. Apparently, once they found the Ethiopian kingdom, they started addressing the king as Prester John, and this obviously confused the locals, but they apparently played along with it for various different reasons, maybe to take trade, to gain knowledge, who knows. So by this point, we are well into the 1500s, over 400 years since the beginning of this idea of Prester John even started. And eventually the myth of this character begins to fade away, of course, until now. I don't think anyone I've ever met or talked to has heard of a Prester John. Certainly it's not taught in high schools. There might have been like a word in a history book. When I searched it on YouTube, when I was researching this video, I found one animated video, one about 10-minute long scripted dialogue video, and then some gameplay videos of a video game where you can play Prester John. So there really isn't a whole lot of knowledge out there about this character that, you know, so greatly inspired and lived around the age of exploration. And the story is fascinating to me because my favorite thing about history is seeing the people in history. I've learned personally that humans are exactly the same at their core all around the world, regardless of religion, race, gender, whatever. If you get down to humanity, humanity's the same. So I have this hypothesis that if people are kind of the same around the globe, why shouldn't they be the same throughout history as well? Your grandpa might be weird to you now, but when he was 20 years old, he was probably just like you. So I love to put myself in the shoes of the people who might have believed or hoped for this Christian king. And not to say that everyone would have. Certainly everyone wouldn't have. I know human nature. People nowadays think that the earth is flat, or that Nelson Mandela died in prison in the 90s. People think a whole lot of things divorced from fact, but that is humanity in a sense. So certainly the day-to-day people that don't ever get written about, but that make up, you know, the entirety of the population, the people that we don't hear about because they were just farmers, because they were just servants. Obviously, Prester John wouldn't have had any real importance to them. Why would it have? But looking back at the people that made history in the sense that they're the people we remember, this character certainly did have a decent impact on a very pivotal time in Western civilization. Going back to the fact that, you know, both of Columbus's books on his first voyage mentioned this character. And I think Columbus sums up this whole story perfectly. Most scholars that I've read who seem to have the most formulated and educated opinions agree that Columbus never accepted the fact that he didn't reach some islands off the coast of Asia. And he believed in a man called Prester John, whether he believed in the physical or whether he believed in the myth of it. As far as we're concerned, it doesn't matter all that much. But Columbus was this figure that became so popular that he became a myth in a sense, that for the longest time, certainly in American history, the truth of the man was divorced from the myth of the man. Just as the common people who never made a history book of the 12th, 13th, 14th, and 15th centuries might not have cared and maybe shouldn't have, or had no reason to care of the truth behind a Prester John. Us enlightened 21st centurians still frequently overlook a whole bunch of things. And we're kind of starting to see that with the picture of Columbus. There was the whole idea that he was, you know, the brave sailor that found America and opened up the European mind. And there's a federal holiday in the United States called Columbus Day. We believed all that for a good long time. And we're kind of now starting to see, hey, maybe this isn't a guy we should celebrate. Genocide has been used a lot around Columbus, and I think you can make a good case for that. You can also make a decent case for the good things he did, but that's not what this video is for. I just like to end with a lesson. What's the lesson? And the lesson is just try and be truthful. Understand that what you're being told might not be the truth, including this video. And just be humble. And with all of that, I greatly appreciate you spending the time and learning about Prester John with me. If you liked this video, please, you can subscribe to this channel, my personal channel, as well as the State of Occurrence channel, which is my music channel, which will be linked below. You can also like it, share it, do that whole thing. Yeah, I really enjoyed this. Until next time, I've been Matthew Nyman, and I'm gonna go get some sleep after I edit this video.